up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about the top 10 best records of 1965. I just spent several hours going through all the different records that came out that year, and I have to say that the top 4 or 5 on this list are incredibly great records, and then most of the other music that came out that year was nowhere near as good as those top 4 or 5 records. So I think you're going to see that on this list. But the main things that I was looking for when ranking these albums is, number one, I would say the top 2 things is going to be how good are the actual songs on the record, as well as how innovative was the record at the time, or how unique was it. And then the other things that I take into consideration are going to be the production, the performance by the artist, and the songwriting of the artist. So those are the things I'm looking for. With that being said, number 10 on the list is going to be a Smokey Robinson record called Going to a Go-Go. The most famous tracks on this list are going to be Tracks of My Tears, as well as Going to a Go-Go. And this album is incredibly influential, and I think the songwriting is one of the biggest things that stands out, because so many artists of the 60s covered Smokey Robinson songs. And so, I mean, I just read the other day that Pete Townsend from The Who, he wrote the song Substitute after he listened to the Tracks of My Tears song so many times, because there's a lyric in there about being the substitute, and that's how he wrote the song Substitute for The Who. And number 9 on my list is going to be an album by the Rolling Stones called December's Children. There's a couple of good things about this record, and there's a couple of bad things. The bad things is that a lot of the songs, most of the songs they did not write, and most of the songs were already featured on previous albums that came out before this one. The good thing about this record is that it's very consistent. There's not a lot of bad songs. There's just a lot of mediocre songs, and then there's a couple really good ones. Like, I think I'm Free is one of the best ones. And the other good thing about the record is that the first song they ever wrote, As Tears Go By, is on this record. So, you know, it's not by any means the best Rolling Stones record, but it's also not their worst. I think it's just a very consistent record, and for 1965, I think it's one of the better ones from that year. Number 8 on my list is going to be an album by the Yardbirds called Having a Rave Up with the Yardbirds. This album is great because we have songs like Heart Full of Soul, we have Evil Hearted Jew, we have You're a Better Man Than I. So there's some great songs on here. The problem is they didn't write those songs, and I did not know that until I was researching it today. But a guy by the name of Graham Goldman actually wrote a lot of their biggest hits. But with that being said, you still have guitar playing coming from Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, which for 1965, this is probably some of the best guitar playing that you're going to find at that time. But still, the songs are good. At least most of the songs are good. I'm not a huge fan of the B side of this record because it's just live tracks, and I don't think the production's pretty bad. I don't think it's not really fun to listen to. But the A side is great. There's some great songs on here. And so that's why Having a Rave Up is going to be number 8 on my list. Number 7 on my list is going to be another album by the Yardbirds called For Your Love. This one is very similar to Having a Rave Up because there is a couple really good songs, and then the rest of the record is pretty mediocre. I would say the best song on this record is going to be For Your Love, the title track. And once again, the problem with this is it was not written by the Yardbirds, though. And so, although that's a little bit of a drawback, I still think this is a pretty solid record and just a little bit better than Having a Rave Up. Number 6 on my list is going to be an album by the Beach Boys called Summer Days and Summer Nights. And the great thing about this record is that it really starts to showcase what the Beach Boys, specifically Brian Wilson, are capable of in terms of their writing. Because we have songs like California Girls, we have Let 'Em Run Wild, we have Help Me Rhonda. And so these are some of the best Beach Boys songs of their career, all featured on this album. The other songs on the record are not horrible, but they're also not the greatest. I would say that the record has a nice flow to it, though, and that all the songs kind of fit in with each other. You can tell the Beach Boys are really starting to develop a strong sound, and so that is why this is number 6 on my list. Number 5 on my list is going to be a record by the Byrds called Mr. Tambourine Man, and even though most of the songs on this record are actually covers, I still think the best song on here is an original. It was written by Gene Clark, and it is called I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better. So then you have the other songs on here that are, like I said, the Dylan covers, which the important thing with this record, the most important thing, is the sound that they created with their harmonies as well as the guitar. Because for electrifying folk music at the time, this was something that was new and innovative, and that's what makes this record stand out. So that's the biggest thing, but even with that aside, I would say the covers for the Dylan songs are still great, because a big thing with the early Dylan hits and the Dylan songs is that some of them are hard to listen to because you have his voice that a lot of people don't like, you have the harmonica, you have the production's not great, and Dylan is really all about the writing. It's not so much about his great performance, and that's kind of where the Byrds come in because the Byrds do these, in some cases, much better performances of the song. But that's really it. That's why this is going to be number 5 on the list. Now we get to number 4 on my list, and I think you're going to see what I was saying where these artists were so ahead of their time. These albums are so much better than pretty much all the other music that was coming out at that time. So number 4 is going to be Help by the Beatles. This album is great because it's very consistent. It's almost every song is good. I would say the only bad one is probably Dizzy Miss Lizzy, but you have some phenomenal songs on here like Help. You have Ticket to Ride, you have I've Just Seen a Face. There's lots of great songs on this record. There's a couple covers. I want to say there's at least one cover of Ringo's song of Act Naturally as a cover, but I think almost all the other ones are originals. And so you can see that the Beatles are really starting to develop some great songwriting skills at that time. Number 3 is going to be another Beatles record called Rubber Soul. I think this one is just a little bit better because I think the songwriting is starting to get a little bit better. It's not as poppy and cheesy as Help. And you have some songs like Girl, you have Drive My Car, you have Norwegian Wood. And so I think you can see that the Beatles are starting to kind of branch out a little bit. I think this is the record where I'm pretty sure this is when they started doing psychedelics right before this record. And you know, you can kind of see that their songwriting started growing a little bit more. But it's a very strong record. How I said, there's lots of great songs on there, and that is why this is number 3. The next 2 records on here were very hard to rank because they're pretty much equally as good. But with that being said, number 2 is going to be Highway 61 Revisited by Bob Dylan. This record is phenomenal. We have Like a Rolling Stone, we have Desolation Row. This just showcases how great of a songwriter Bob Dylan was. Some of his best songs are on here. And for 1965, there was pretty much nothing like it. John Lennon and Paul McCartney came close, I would say, but I would still put Bob Dylan as a better songwriter for 1965, just for 1965. But there's lots of great songs on here. Not only that, but the guitar playing. If you listen to the guitar playing on some of these songs like Tombstone Blues, the guitar, I think it's Mike Bloomfield playing guitar on this record. The guitar playing is also phenomenal. Now, the only thing I don't like, and this goes for a lot of Bob Dylan records, is the production. His harmonica is not produced well. It's very annoying most of the time. And the record just sounds like it could have been produced better. Then we get to number 1 on my list. Number 1 is going to be Bringing It All Back Home, which is another Dylan record. And how I said, they're almost equally as good. I could have put the other one, Highway 61, in first place too. But I put Bringing It All Back Home because not only did it come first, it came before Highway 61, but you also have stuff like Gates of Eden. You have It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. You have, you know, there's lots of great songs in here. Subterranean Homesick Blues, She Belongs to Me. So, how I said, it's very similar to Highway 61, but since he came out with this one first, I would say a song like Gates of Eden, or let's say Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, the lyrics in that song are pretty much one of a kind, and nobody's ever going to write anything even similar to all those verses he wrote for that song. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue could probably go down as one of the best written songs of all time, and that's why that is number 1 on my list.